Today, I'm going to go over with you how to think like a therapist, and you're not going to believe who inspired this. Trust me, you know him. I'm Natalie Rosado, a licensed mental health counselor, and I am thrilled to be back here. If you guys haven't caught our last few videos, definitely go back and check those out. I did the first one where I just talked a little bit about the reflection room and what that's all about, and then subsequently we've had a few of our therapists that have created some phenomenal videos that I thought were super informative. I, in fact, learned quite a bit too. So yeah, if you haven't checked those out, you definitely want to. But all right, so who inspired me to do this video today? So you would probably think that it was, I don't know, Freud or Adler or possibly Carl Rogers, but no, it was Steve Burns from Blue's Clues. So stick with me for a second. There's been this viral, I probably would call it viral or trending video that Steve Burns created from Blue's Clues. By the way, though, on a side note, I had no idea that his name's actually Steve. So I thought that was really cool. Anyways, I don't know if you guys did, but I was like, interesting. They kept his name. But so I was actually scrolling through TikTok the other day and I happened to stumble upon this video. And initially it didn't seem that interesting or intriguing, really. For those of you guys who haven't seen it, I'll describe it. So it was kind of like his face, and he's looking in the camera and he asks a simple question. It's something along the lines of like, how are you doing today, or something like that. And at first I quickly flipped to the next video, but and then I was like, wait, what's this about? It's kind of odd. It's a little unique the way it's set up. So I went back and I watched the video and I was absolutely intrigued. And not just by the video itself, by the comments that a lot of people wrote. And so in the video, he just asked that simple question and he just kind of sits there and he acts like he's listening. He provides some nonverbal cues, like some nodding and some and then the video is over. And so of course I quickly went to the comments, because who doesn't love comments on these videos? That's like the best part, in my opinion. So I went to the comment section and I'm like looking through, and I didn't know exactly where, what people's responses were going to be to a video like this. And I was so touched by what people were writing. I mean, it was message after message after message, or I should say comment after comment after comment. And people were really sharing some of the things that they were battling and struggling with and facing. And it got me thinking about how a simple 30-second, maybe 45-second video on TikTok had such a large response. So as I was sitting there reflecting, I thought about this concept of loneliness and how a lot of times we don't recognize the impact that loneliness has on an individual. So since COVID has kind of come and subsided, I think during those few years, we were able to kind of see the impact that loneliness has on a person's overall mental health, but then also like physical health and just overall well-being. In fact, there are a few stats out there that I can think of off the top of my head. And I remember kind of reading a little bit about this during COVID time, because I was just very, interested in just the social isolation piece of all of that. And I remember a few stats. Now these are probably, old at this point. It's been a few years, but there was one that talked about how loneliness had a similar impact on a person's overall health as like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And there were a few more stats that were like that were pretty like attention grabbing. But overall, I think that research shows that loneliness really has an overall like negative impact on someone's quality of life. And it's been shown that it also kind of increases the rate, I guess, of like early death. As I was thinking about this concept and I was watching Steve Burns' video over and over a few times, it got me thinking about some of these keywords like social connection or even vulnerability or attachment. And I'm not shocked that my mind went to attachment, because attachment theory is actually one of my like foundational, I guess I would say like approaches that I use when working with my clients. I'm one of those like typical a therapist where you expect, a therapist to kind of go back and ask about like their childhood. So that's me. So I love attachment theory. And for those of you guys who may not necessarily be as familiar with it, I definitely encourage you guys to kind of look it up and Google it. The concept was founded by this, I guess he's a researcher. I don't know. I'd have to go look and see what his actual background was. But his name was John Bowlby. And he highlighted quite a bit about the importance of attachment. And that's kind of actually, it was trending a few years ago, up until probably like a year ago on social media. You guys might be familiar with reading information on like secure attachment, and then there's avoidant. It depends on the person who's actually like talking about it, but now it's kind of branched off into various types of attachment styles, but definitely very informative, I think, and it's worth, kind of looking up. But the idea behind it was like, the theory suggests that it's like a child's innate kind of desire to want to forge or connect a relationship with their caregiver at a very, very early age. And so there's a lot of research too that he did that kind of supported that a bit. I'm just letting you guys into my trail of thought here, but it got me thinking a little bit about a missions trip that I went on a few years back. So gosh, I want to say this was probably back in 2014. And I went on this missions trip to the capital of Honduras and some of the surrounding towns. And for those of you guys that might not be too familiar with mission trips, the idea behind it is you gather with some people and go somewhere. Either mission trips, I guess, could be international ones, but they could also be local ones too. But go somewhere and you just kind of help provide or meet the needs of that community. And so for that specific trip, we ended up going to a number of different orphanages and I guess what we would consider to be group homes here in the States. And just kind of spending time with the kids and getting to know them, bringing them toys and of course items that would help meet their basic needs. It reminded me of this one moment that I had that I will absolutely never forget. And I happened to go into this one orphanage and there was a lady there that was kind of overseeing it. I don't know how they would refer to them, but they're kind of what we would refer to as like group home parents essentially, or just people that are like in charge of overseeing, like the orphanages and the group homes. So there was one lady to, I don't even know how many kids were in that orphanage. I mean, it was just, I just was floored at like, all of the responsibilities that this one lady had in taking care of all these children. And I walked into this one specific room in the orphanage, and there were a number of car seats that were lined up along the wall. And there were babies that were in the car seats. I walked into this one room and I'm looking, and, it was a sight that I had never really seen before. And so it definitely touched me in a way that I had never really been moved, honestly. And so I go in there and, I'm just trying to figure out a way that I could help this lady for the little bit of time that I was going to be there. And I remember she kind of rushed in and she brought me this bowl of, I don't know what it was, like a soup of some sort or something. I don't know. But, and she asked if I would feed these babies. And so I was like, yeah, but I didn't know like how exactly that worked. But I bent down and I picked up the first one that was closest to me. And I would say he was probably 9 months, 10 months old. And so I held him and I fed him. And after I felt like he was, full off of this milky substance that we were, providing him, I went to go put him down in order to pick up the next one that was in the car seat next to him. And the minute I put him down, he just started wailing and he extended his arms towards me and just wanted me to hold him. And it was in that moment that these things that we read about or that we learn about, like I learned about attachment theory in school, and I've watched all of the old outdated videos that talk a lot about like the initial research that was done for that. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized how innately like wired this desire for connection and attachment really is in us as human beings. Because we had this child who didn't know me. I wasn't like, a familiar scent or a familiar face to him, but there was something about being held for the 10, 15 minutes that I was holding him that the minute I went to put him down, he realized that he needed that and wanted more of that connection. And so I walked away, and I felt like I walked away with more than I had provided on that day. So I'd say all of that to say that, when we think about this concept of attachment, oftentimes it's defined as like this lasting psychological, emotional connection between two people. And the idea is that attentiveness and responsiveness in a relationship, whether that is a romantic relationship or a working relationship or even a relationship that's familial, between like a parent and a child, that the attentiveness and the responsiveness of the two people involved in that relationship really creates this secure connection that is undescribable. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of attachment and connection. After I saw the video that, Steve Burns posted, it was almost like this reminder that he provided me on the deep need for connection and attachment in our society. But before I talk a little bit about that, I do want to highlight the fact that there are a number of things that can cause a disconnection or a detachment for people in any kind of relationship. So I don't want to overlook that. It's not just someone not wanting to be in a relationship or wanting to be present, but there are many other factors I recognize from a clinical perspective that, might cause someone to struggle with attaching with a loved one. And some of those things might include being what we would call emotionally unavailable, in relationships where it's like there's so much trauma or heaviness or baggage from one's previous experiences that prevent us from being present in that specific relationship. Sometimes people find that avoiding topics or certain conversations or avoiding physical connection sometimes in a relationship, they find that to be safer. It's like a form of protection. And then just life happens in general where just major life stressors occur that will sometimes kind of get in the way of someone being able to really create that personal connection. So I say all of that to say, so what does Steve Burns and Honduras and babies have to do with thinking like a therapist? So before I share a little bit about that, I do want to talk a little bit about us as therapists and the stereotypes behind that. So I just want to have a little bit of fun here. It doesn't bother me, but I love hearing people's expectations or people's thoughts on therapists, or even in our society, how we're oftentimes represented in a movie or a show or a book. I think it's kind of hilarious. And so I think some of the major stereotypes might be that we're shrinks. And so, which I just cringe at that word, but the idea behind that is that we just love to pathologize things and we find problems in everything. And our main goal is to diagnose and to treat. And so that's all we're good for, right? So there's that concept of being a shrink. I think something else I've heard recently that I thought was pretty funny was that sometimes they call, I guess there's people out there that will refer to counseling sessions as confessional sessions. And so the idea behind that, my understanding is that people come to counseling and it's almost like they treat it as a confessional, where they're just totally unloading things that they feel guilty about or feel bad about or ashamed of, and then just kind of go on, their way, and not to minimize at all, the experience of a confession or anything like that. But yeah, and so that's the idea, I guess, behind it too, that people just come and they just kind of unload and then they leave. I think it's funny. And then a third major stereotype is a little bit closer to what we do as therapists, but that we just sit and listen. And when I've seen this reflected in certain social media posts or things that I see on TV, I think it's funny how we're represented. But the idea, I guess, behind that is that we just kind of sit and we listen and we nod and we just say, mm-hmm. And then people just kind of bend and that's it. Like there's nothing more to the counseling experience, which in some ways, I do nod and I do go, and my keyword in counseling is always like, wow. And so I think some of that's true, but we do so much more than, just that. And I would say, like, if that's been your counseling experience where it's any of those three things that I mentioned, or anything else that doesn't create the best experience. I mean, I'm not here to give advice, but I would just say maybe kind of look into those relationships a little deeper, because that's definitely not all that we do. It's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So the reason why I say all of that is because I wanted to take this moment to share a little bit about something that I feel like us as therapists, we only know and we experience, and we rarely get to really talk about it. Now, here's the thing. This is probably an eye-rolling moment because it's like I want to talk about something, but I haven't yet been able to put words to what I'm about to try to explain. But there's something very special that happens in the counseling room between a therapist and a client. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical room. I know that, telehealth and virtual sessions are, really popular, especially since COVID. That's really all I offer right now myself. And I still experience that with my clients. There's something there between the therapist and the client where there's this connection that occurs. And I cannot tell you how many times I can sense is probably a good word. I can sense something shifting in the atmosphere where there's been like what some people would, I guess, refer to as like an aha moment or a breakthrough of some sort. Or even there have been times where I'm, talking to someone in counseling and obviously it's a very intimate, setting and it's relationship. There are times where I can sense that the client is really struggling with something that weighs heavy on them emotionally, and to just be present for them in that moment, just a simple presence that I think can sometimes make all of the difference. As I share that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how in our society, I feel like we do a phenomenal job of teaching persuasion without listening. And so what I mean by that is, I don't know if you guys can think back to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, even grad school. We're asked to write a paper on a specific topic, or we are asked to come up with some kind of hypothesis or theory as to why we think that's something is true, or there's some kind of correlation there between these two things. And we're taught how to be able to effectively communicate our argument. But can you think back to a time where in a class you were taught how to effectively listen? And I feel like that's one of our largest missing pieces when it comes to our larger society. Because when you think about effective communication, or you think about effective communicators or influencers that we listen to today, or even thinking about it on a smaller scale, on a more individual basis, where there's a healthy relationship, there's this reciprocity that exists there between two people. Any relationship where a person is just trying to convince the other person that they are right all of the time and they're trying to be extremely persuasive is not going to be a very long lasting or sustaining relationship. And if it is long lasting, it's definitely not going to be a healthy one. And so I feel like sometimes some of the skill sets that are overlooked are things that are not as tangible. So we're talking about empathy and compassion and patience and having the interest in leaning in and being open to hearing the opinions and the thoughts of a loved one. And that in itself oftentimes leads to being able to identify sometimes some of the emotions that are sitting underneath the words that people speak, because as we're leaning into a conversation or a dialogue that we're trying to have with someone, we're not only listening to their words, but if you're paying close attention and you're present, you're also picking up on a number of other things that we would categorize as nonverbal cues, right? So I think that these are a lot of soft skills, I guess is how we refer to them in the workplace, that are oftentimes overlooked, that actually are like the secret sauce to effective relationships. And so, how to think like a therapist. So we have finally arrived. So I thought I would just share just a few things that I thought would be a really good starting point. And I can go into detail about, so many different skills and tools and techniques that we use. But there's nothing more effective, I think, than these three things that a good effective therapist would offer. Let me first pause and say I tried to think of like a really good acronym that I could potentially use, and it didn't work. So if anybody comes up with one, definitely let me know. That would be super helpful. But okay, so these are the three things that came to my mind. So the first is trust and safety. So there's something about creating a very safe, non-judgmental, warm environment that really leads to people feeling more comfortable opening up and feeling like they can let their defensive walls down. I mean, think about that word trust. Oftentimes that falls on like the top 5 things that people are looking for in a romantic partner, right? It's like someone that is trustworthy or someone that we can trust. And so there's something very special and unique about creating a very like trusting and safe environment. The second thing is honest conversations. I feel like there's something about our connection as therapists and clients that fosters this feeling like a desire to just open up and be transparent and to be honest about things. And that's done through a number of different things, like asking questions and sometimes initiating the tough conversations. We do that as therapists when we know that there's something that's there that we can sense a person is wanting to talk about, but they're just kind of afraid to take that step. We take that step for them. And just checking in with people on some of the things that they've talked about with us can really kind of foster this feeling of like honest conversation or an honest relationship. And then the third thing I refer to as like a sense of agency. And what I mean by that is like when there's trust and safety and then openness and honesty that's in a relationship, it really creates, I guess, what I would refer to as like this empowerment in a person to feel like they have the strength and the skills, the motivation and the support, which is the most important piece, to make whatever changes are necessary for their individual lives or relationships or whatever it is that's bringing them to counseling. And so I feel like having a supportive partner or a supportive friend or a supportive boss or supervisor really can provide the sense of agency for people. All right, so you have learned today how to think like a therapist. So we have trust and safety, we have honest conversations, and then we also have creating a sense of agency. So hopefully this is a really good first step for you to begin to pour into the relationships that you yourself would love to see be very long-lasting and healthy relationships. So I'm going to leave you guys with a question, as I always like to do. And the question is, do you find that you are trying to be more persuasive in your relationships, or are you actually leaning in to listen more? So thanks so much for spending this time with me. I had a great time sharing all of these thoughts that were up in my head, from Steve Burns to Honduras and babies to effective communication. But hopefully you guys will join us again soon. And as always, keep reflecting.